let's start disassembling the Aquarius and get it ready for cleaning up and rebuild. I got this regulator right off an auction site, so I've got no idea what kind of condition it's in internally, but from the outside it looks pretty good. But I thought I would start with a simple unbalanced piston regulator to start out with, and the Aquarius fits the bill for that. So let's get started. I've already went ahead and removed the port plugs. First off, go ahead and pull the star spring retainer right here. Just take your pick, get underneath it. We're not going to reuse it, so you can just get under the edge of it and pull it up, set it aside. Then you'll have your first stage filter. Hopefully it's not in there terribly tight, but this one appears as though it is, so you need a pick to get under the edge. There we go. This comes in the service kit, so you're going to want to probably just go ahead and discard it and start again. There's also, you can see, a O-ring, which is really used as a spacer just to keep the first stage filter tight with the star retainer. Then simply flip it over. Standard screwdriver will remove this. Now be careful when you remove the cap, because there are two springs underneath it, and those, if it's tipped the other way, they're going to want to roll out and go along the floor. There's your spring. And there's the cap. You can go ahead and remove the O-ring from there. Set it aside. This is part of the replacement kit. Next, you can, in here, you can see the piston, and it can be a little challenging to get out. Sometimes they're frozen there. So I find the simplest way is to go through from the top, and you're going to need something that's very thin. Paper clip should work. Really the only thing that's holding it in there is the tension on the O-ring. So if you just go in there and push very gently on that, the spring and the piston will fall out. Now we can see, or if you zoom in on this a little bit, you can kind of see the first signs of corrosion on there. Not bad, but somebody has just simply over greased this O-ring, and it's accumulated a lot of sand and gunk around it. That should clean up just fine. Go ahead and pull the O-rings on here. Piston seal O-ring. A little harder than I thought. Way too much silicone grease on this. There we go. Now, to remove the piston seat, you're going to want to use the same tool we just pushed it out with, which is very narrow on the end, and gently feed it up into the center. See if I can push it out. There we go. An area to watch when you're cleaning this regulator is inside the piston cavity, where the piston runs in here. You want to be sure you get that area especially clean and free of any debris. You can see this one, most of what you can see in there is just silicone lube that's stuck sand and grit to it. But this surface area in here is where the piston rides, and a little further up, which you can't really reach, further up in here is where the piston seals itself. And way down in there, I'm sorry, the camera's just not going to focus close enough. You can see the actual volcano orifice that the piston seat would rest against up in there. So now you've got this torn down. Set your replacement parts aside. Set these over here, and you are ready to clean. You're ready to clean up your regulator. Now that we have everything cleaned up, we're ready to start reassembling. Need your Sawyer Carts kit from Vintage Double Hose. Shameless product plug there. First thing to start on, what I do is put in the new seat in the piston. It's an interference fit, so it may be a little challenge to get it started squarely to begin with. But once you do, usually with your finger, you can press it in, or against a hard flat surface. There we have that. Next, we're going to put our piston, or one of our smaller of the piston seal O-rings on, and large piston seal O-ring. Now we're going to be ready to put the piston back into the main body. So at this point, you want to use a little lubricant on the O-ring. Basically, you're using just enough to get the O-ring shiny. You don't want it globbed on there. There's no benefit to it. All it does is another avenue for sand and grit to be attracted to. So again, just like so. Put your mainspring back in, or back around the piston, I should say. Insert it into the main body, and once it gets started, just push it forward. Next, get your capper. This is really the adjustment screw for it. So let's go ahead and put the O-ring on. Lightly lubricate this. And at this point, because you are adjusting with this, you can give the threads just a light lube as well. Like so. Make sure you get your spring. Go ahead and screw it down. Get it a little past flush where you've got a couple of threads showing. We'll adjust the IP here next. You can see I've got a couple of threads showing there on the edge. Next, take your filter sport O-ring, put it in. Your new filter with the rough surface up. There's a rough and a smooth surface. Rough surface goes up. Take your star retainer, lay it in. You can push it in with your finger to get it started, and then take the end of your your pick or whatever flat plastic or brass piece you have and push it down around the edges till it locks in. There's no pressure pushing backwards on it, so you're just making sure it's down there securely. And there you go. Your Aquarius first stage is reassembled and it's ready to get the IP set, and we'll go to that next. Alright, we're ready to set the IP on the Aquarius. Let me take a minute and explain a little bit about the setup here. It's going to be probably a little different than what you use, but what you're going to need to set yours up is you're going to need a cylinder with 2500 psi, which the factory recommended IP pressure for the regulator or the first stage is plus or minus 5 psi at 2500 psi. What I set up here, because I work on so many different regulators, is I've got a main air supply from my air bank going into a regulator, which allows me to adjust between 0 and 3,500 psi depending on what first stage I'm working on. So if you kind of picture this as the cylinder neck and the valve where this is attached, pretty much the same thing. I have one hose going here which is connected to an IP gauge. Now you can't see it, but on the back side here there's a pressure relief device. In case this would go, if this goes over about 175 pounds, it opens up and lets air out. As I said in the tile before this, when you're setting this up, if your IP gauge does not have a built-in pressure relief device like this one does, be sure you have a second stage, a good working second stage attached as well as your IP gauge. So if when you initially put pressure to the regulator, the IP runs away, you don't blow a hose, otherwise you're going to ruin your gauge and there's potential to blow a hose. Setting the IP on this unbalanced piston first stage is very simple. The screw on the back is where you start. As you screw this clockwise, you're going to decrease the IP. As you screw it counterclockwise, you're going to increase the IP. And you want to do this in kind of small increments because it's going to take a while for that new nylon seat to make an indentation on the volcano orifice, which actually is going to allow it to seat and hold a stable IP. So initially you're going to want to hook it up, see where you're at, and then purge your second stage, or basically what I'm doing with this button here is purging the second stage a few times and see where you're at. Then make adjustments from there. Once you get it where you are comfortable with, just shut your air supply off and let it set for 10 or 20 minutes. If the IP is stable in the range between plus or minus 5 psi at 135 psi at a 2500 psi cylinder, then you're good to go. If not, you're going to have to cycle it a few times and then do the same, let it set. In my estimation, sometimes it takes 200 or 300 cycles before the seat takes a really good impression on the volcano orifice and you make a good seal. But you just need to take your time, be patient with this one. You can see this one's pretty well settled out at 135 psi at 2500 psi. I would then just shut the air off. You're not going to let it set too long, as you get your cylinder secured so nothing else can interfere with it or it can fall or roll off, and just let it set. And as long as you don't have more than 5 psi creep on it, I'd say you've got an Aquarius that's ready to attach with the 1085 that we did in the last video, and you've got a great regulator to dive with.